Oh, wait, stop the footage. Back it up a bit. There. This is supposed to be the owner of the house, and yet he has homework to do? What kind of sense does that make? Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look back at SimAnt, one of the seminal simulation sandbox titles to sneak out of Maxis in their sanguine software days. And more specifically, this was the third such title, predated only by the original SimCity and SimEarth, whereby SimCity was about simulating a bustling metropolis, and SimEarth was, well, a thing we'll probably get around to someday. SimAnt here is all about simulating an ant colony, sort of. I mean, here's the thing. I hadn't really ever given SimAnt a solid shot up to now. A friend of mine had it back when I was a kid, but for some reason I always got bored very quickly when he'd load this game up. I was sitting down and playing it for this review. It's kinda got a very strange dichotomy going on. I mean, on the one hand, it does present an interesting premise of being able to watch and influence the progression of one or more ant colonies through the various phases they would go through in real life, dealing with various hazards in the process. But what's weird is that the game portion of this game feels arbitrary and useless, as though they should have focused more on the sim part of the simulation, as opposed to trying to gamify it. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense just yet, but trust me, it will by the time this review is over. I guess the point I'm trying to get at here is that this is a strange case of a piece of software which would have been better had it been less of a game than it was forced to be in order to sell it as a game. Which, you know what, that still doesn't make a lot of sense without explaining everything, so let's just get on with it. SimAnt was developed and published by Maxis in 1991 and is effectively a one-player simulation game. It supports kind of a strange array of video modes, since there's an emphasis on high resolution over color fidelity. Thus, a lot of monochrome modes are supported, and while there is support for some 320 by 200 video modes, their use is discouraged and is pretty much unnecessary unless you're on a Tandy computer with no additional video upgrades. The best modes supported by each different video standard are 720 by 348 for monochrome Hercules, 320 by 200 16 color for Tandy, 640 by 350 16 color for EGA, 640 by 480 16 color for VGA, and if you were unlucky enough to be on an IBM system with an MCGA chipset, you would be stuck with its 640 by 480 monochrome mode, since it's not compatible with any of the other high-res color modes available with this game. And no, there's no low-res MCGA 256 color support. In terms of audio, it supports the most common devices of the time, and as for its current release state, it's still commercial, and surprisingly, the game has yet to be given a digital re-release. Fortunately, physical copies are pretty easy and cheap to get nowadays, with loose copies typically only going for a few bucks, while fully boxed copies tend to sell for around the $20 mark, regardless of if it's the original 1991 floppy disk release, which is the one I have, or if it's one of the later CD-ROM re-releases, of which there were several, most of which are not DOS compatible and are instead meant for Windows 3.1 or Macintosh machines, so that's something to be mindful of during your search for a copy. One other thing to point out too is that this is one of those rare instances where a game which had both a DOS and console releases has ended up more expensive and rare on consoles compared to DOS, as it usually works the other way around. As an example, the cheapest loose SNES card I found sold online went for around $20, most were closer to $30, while fully boxed SNES copies typically sold for between $40 and $80 depending on condition. Now, given how underpowered the CPU of the SNES is compared to a DOS machine though, I have to imagine this game plays way better on DOS. Also, let's take a quick look through the box I was sent for this game because this thing's freaking loaded. The first thing we find on the inside are both sizes of floppy disks, a quartet of 5¼ inch disks and a pair of 3½ inch disks, all of which are low density so they can be read on pretty much any floppy drives you put them in. A quick start guide, which also has the keyboard shortcuts listed on the back. A letter from Jeff Braun, the president of Maxis at the time, asking players to mail in bug reports and game suggestions, a Logitech Mouseman installation guide, the registration card for— no, wait a minute, a Mouseman installation guide? What the heck is this doing in the box? Hey Mark Sider, if you've got one of these things and you're missing your installation guide for it, well, now you know where it ended up. Anyways, we've got the registration card, which was never mailed in, despite numerous pleadings by whoever made it to send the quote, stupid thing in. Maxis' software toys catalog for the time, which is kind of stretching things out given how few games they had under their belts at this moment as a publisher. And finally, this 176-page beast of a manual, only half of which has anything to do with playing the game, as the other half could basically substitute as an entire high school class curriculum teaching you just about every little thing about ants you could possibly ever want to know. When starting the program up, you get a choice of 5 different gameplay options: tutorial game, quick game, full game, load game, and experimental, which is apparently not a game. The tutorial game plays similarly to a quick game, except it plays in a semi-fixed world so that the tutorial messages which pop up correlate to different positions within the world, so it can appropriately tell you what to do to learn the basic mechanics. The quick game limits the simulation to a single patch of yard, meaning there's no necessity to breed new queens to scatter to other patches in the yard. The full game allows a simulation to run across a massive 12 by 16 grid of yardage, which includes a house as well, with the goal being to effectively overrun the entire yard, drive out the inhabitants of the house while annihilating the competing red ants, as you always play as the black ants, while the experimental mode is basically a sandbox which allows you to edit the state of everything however you want. The game is generally played exclusively with the mouse. There are keyboard shortcuts, but because of how many of them there are, it's generally easier to just stick with the mouse controls. While you have a huge windowed interface with various buttons to click on, these buttons are primarily used to switch which windows you're viewing or to change the information you're looking at in those views, as most of what you do is click to move the ants around. Specifically, at all moments in time, without exception, the game forces you to have direct control over an ant in your colony, turning this ant into a yellow ant to distinguish it from all others. Now, by clicking once with the mouse button, you can move your ant around and it will do its best to pathfind how to get to where you've clicked, while double-clicking will instead have the ant perform the most logical action in relation to what you have double-clicked on, such as collecting food, digging tunnels, fighting red ants, etc. In the quick game, you have access to 3 different maps: the black nest, the red nest, and the surface, while the full game opens up access to the yard map as well. One thing that may be a little weird getting used to at first is that the nests occur from side views, yet the surface is an overhead view. So how do these two link up? Basically, as a new queen ant, you're able to dig one tunnel from the surface wherever you want on the left half of the map, which will create a link to the center of your new nest. From there, digging from the surface into the nest is no longer allowed, and instead, digging up from the nest to the surface creates a random link elsewhere on the surface to that spot. And best advice here is to always dig your first entrance as close to the center of the yard as you can to ensure the best access to food. Once your queen ant has set herself up in the nest, a new worker ant will immediately be born and you'll be given control over it. From here, the main game loop begins, whereby you're trying to collect food, expand the colony, and drive out any competition. However, because you can only directly control one ant at a time, not the entire colony, you need to pay heed to 2 special pyramid controls: the caste control and the behavior control. Caste control is what allows you to influence the kinds of new ants born by the queen between one of 3 possibilities: workers, soldiers, and breeders. Workers eat the least and are the most efficient for handling all tasks. Soldiers are better at dealing with threats, but consume more food for every movement and action they take, while breeders include both fertile males and new queens, both of whom consume a ton of food while offering next to nothing in terms of helping out the colony. But once a male mates with a new queen, that queen can fly off to a new patch of the yard in the full game to start a new colony. Generally speaking, you don't start making breeders until you're ready to expand out. The behavior control, on the other hand, determines what actions your ants will most likely want to perform each time they finish a task: foraging, digging, and nursing. Foraging means leaving the nest and hunting for food to bring back to the nest or feed to the queen. Digging means digging out new tunnels to expand the size of the nest so more food can be stored. While nursing means taking care of larvae to ensure they ultimately develop into new ants instead of dying off. And you can set these controls to automatic, but I've found that the auto setting really doesn't do a good job of things, so it's often better to take manual control. Now you can also theoretically save different set points, but the way saving and loading set points is handled is counterintuitive, and I was never able to get it to work right. Generally, for the colony to thrive, it needs food, plain and simple. Now, if you let the simulation play out without any intervention at all through the yellow ant, your colony is probably going to die out pretty quick. And this is because the whole foraging thing is intentionally dumbed down to ensure that while you are in command of a colony, you must interact with your yellow ant to ensure its survival, as the workers of your colony will generally just spin around in circles if they can't immediately find anything to eat. Instead, as the yellow ant, you must find some food and bring it back, and in so doing, create a trail of pheromones which the other ants of the colony will pick up on and follow. And in so doing, create more trails, which will attract even more ants in the colony, eventually allowing the ants to figure out where they need to go for food without having to rely on your yellow ant. One way to jumpstart this process when a new batch of food plops into the area is to recruit ants. If you hold the mouse button down over top of an ant, you'll get basic information about it, but doing this on the yellow ant that you have control over will bring up a menu with some extra options, specifically for recruiting or exchanging bodies with a different ant so you can take control of something other than a worker, such as a soldier if you want to attack a competing colony. The recruiting mechanic is a little unrealistic, but effectively makes it so that a number of ants will now be attracted to the position of your yellow ant. Thus, wherever the yellow ant goes, the recruited ants follow. This allows you to take your ants into battle or move them to where food is. Though when using them to source food, you have to release them following so that they'll pick up the food and take it back to the nest. But by having so many do it all at once, the trail of pheromones they leave behind will be much stronger, and thus make it easier for workers to follow that trail back to that same source of food. There's also a number of hazards to semi-watch out for, such as a spider which is constantly going around and munching on individual ants, but it'll become overwhelmed and will want to retreat if too many ants surround it all at once, and with enough ants pestering it, they can actually kill the spider, though another will show up before too long. There's also ant lions to worry about, though it's rare that they get in the way of things. Plus, if the human is roaming the yard, they can end up stepping in random spots, killing everything in that spot. Or if they're mowing the lawn and run over the patch you're playing in, all living things on the surface in that moment will be eradicated. However, you're going to realize pretty quickly that the main loop of the game is not really any more complex than this. Collect food, build your colony up, and when your numbers are considerably better than that of a competing colony, recruit a ton of ants and make a march on the competing colony to take out their queen. Do that, and you win the quick game. Whereas in the full game, this simply means you won't have to worry about competing for food anymore in your present patch of the yard. Now once it comes time to spread outward, you need to make sure your queen is giving birth to breeders, and then head to the yard view so you can initiate mating with the controls there. When new queens have mated, the number of queens available to move to new patches in the yard will increase. And while the game can technically distribute new queens automatically, it generally won't until you are already in control of a sizable number of yard patches, as I believe the logic for handling this increases the odds of distributing new queens relative to how many patches you have control over. Instead, early in the game, you'll want to distribute new queens manually, though you're limited to how far out a new queen can go compared to the colony that you're presently in command of. Once new colonies are started, you can double-click on them in the yard view to switch over to them and take command. And in so doing, discover two highly pertinent shortcomings to this entire experience as a quote-unquote game. To understand these shortcomings, I first need to explain a particular shortcut the game is taking. See, there's freaking 192 different patches of yard and house the game has to simulate, with the number of ants in any one patch sometimes getting as high as 300. To simulate 300 ants at a time in each of 192 patches all at once would mean simulating 57,600 ants simultaneously, which would probably cause an early 90s PC to choke something fierce. As such, the game instead just plays each patch you're not in command of as a numbers game, based on your cast and behavior settings, relative to the quantities of different kinds of ants in each patch of the yard. Because it's not actually simulating those patches though, a huge discrepancy emerges because, as it turns out, the numbers game works out in your favor way better than trying to run each colony yourself. In fact, if you have a colony that's in dire shape, switch out to a different colony, wait a moment, then return to the previous colony, it'll be so much better off than you left it despite so little time passing. Though you'll also notice in the process, the game doesn't actually save the nest or surface states of any patches of the yard other than the one you're in command of. Thus, when you leave a patch and return to it later, any tunnels you dug out yourself to meet some desired design, any food splotches which are present, any positions where the nest breaks through to the surface, all of this will be completely different from how you left it, since it has to be remade from scratch automatically every time you return to it. Basically, what ends up happening in the full game is that once you start spreading to other parts of the yard, you've already won. Just keep mating queens and manually distributing them until you have about 30 yard patches or so, then set it back to automatic, turn the game speed to ultra, and just sit back and watch. Well, sure, the red ant colonies will expand outward too, but my experience is that the numbers favor you over the red ants in terms of the scope of the entire yard and house. Once 70% of the house is infested by either black or red ants, the inhabitants will abandon it. Then once every red ant colony is eliminated and all that remains are black ants, the game is won and you get a final score, which I really don't understand the logic in terms of how it's coming up with said score. But yeah, what ends up happening here, because of the generalizations being used to keep the simulation from dying under its own weight, is that the game part of the game, in terms of controlling a yellow ant and working within nests and on the surface, ends up being too dependent on random chance to succeed, while the sim part of the game is geared too heavily towards success to make for an engaging experience. I mean, no matter how well you understand the mechanics and know what to do to win, food drops sometimes occur right next to the red ants, while a spider blocks off access to your black ants, making it completely impossible to gain any sort of advantage. Or heck, sometimes the food drops just don't happen, and both colonies end up starving to death. But then, once you begin to spread into more of the yard in the full game, it mostly just becomes a set it and wait experience, watching the numbers go up as you plot more queens around the yard, until you are inevitably victorious. All because they wanted to make the yard so freaking huge. I mean, if they instead split the yard into a 4x5 grid instead of a 12x16 grid, I think this game might have had a better shot at being more engaging, because then there'd be enough CPU power to go into handling all of the various nests and surfaces in the background without having to delegate it to an algorithm which doesn't match up to the experience of directly taking command of a colony. And one last thing too is that even though I already mentioned how half of the manual goes into details about how ants function in real life, the game has an information section with a lot of the same information in it, but it's condensed down considerably, in case you want to get that same information but in more manageable chunks with easier lookup of specific details. Overall, SimAnt isn't a bad idea for a game, but because it's trying too hard to be a game, it's lacking complexities in terms of its simulation components, and as such, falls apart both as a gaming experience and as a simulation. The game portion of the game just relies on you doing the exact same tasks over and over and over again, and may still cause you to fail because random chance is too big of a factor, while the simulation portion just isn't accurate enough to give the same sort of mystique as watching a real ant colony. The funny thing here too is that this isn't just my opinion. The game's own designer, Will Wright, same guy who created SimCity, has himself expressed in the past how he felt SimAnt failed to deliver the experience he wanted to convey, and it's long since been something he's considered returning to if given half the chance and a budget to work with. At the same time though, what he learned from making this game ultimately carried over into some of the behavior patterns seen in The Sims. So, take that as you will. So to get this game running its best in DOSBox, you're going to need to set a fixed cycles count, as well as manually set the core into dynamic mode. As for how many cycles to give it, given the fact that DOSBox allows for fast forwarding and that the in-game speed settings are mostly not CPU dependent, the cycle setting you set should basically come down to how fast you want the screen to scroll when you move the mouse to the edges. Now, I was using a setting of 15,000, but if you want the screen to scroll faster, set this higher, or if you want the screen to scroll slower, set this lower. However, I don't recommend going above 20,000 or below 10,000. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now, on January 31st, there'll be an ADG Pro video, first of the season. And we're going to be giving the minimum winning score treatment to a piece of edutainment, of all things. And it's surprisingly not as clear-cut of a process as you might think it would be, so be sure to stay tuned to see just how tricky even an educational game can get when you slap arbitrary score restrictions on yourself. Thanks for watching. An extra special thanks to everyone supporting me on Patreon. Just $1 a month is all it takes to help keep these shows going, so please consider joining everyone you see here over at patreon.com/KASICK.